Darker Pastures is a prairie gothic horror anthology and contains scenes and themes which some listeners may find distressing. For specific content warnings, please always be sure to check the episode notes and listen at your own discretion. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoy today's humbly hideous offering. Episode 28, Corvidae, Part 3. They stand along the roadside, crudely formed from scrap lumber and from fresh-cut scrub timber, sometimes even from rebar and pipe and plywood, stretching on toward the distant horizon like malformed power lines of the world that no longer is. Missy passes beneath their skeletal shadows, not daring to look up, trying to stop up her ears with her hands. For the shabby crucifixes are not mere ornamentation or icon. Each of them bears an occupant. Some have been there long enough to be little more than rags and bones, scant and partial skeletons, the flesh long picked by hungry scavengers, the larger portions not firmly affixed, fallen and dragged away. A few are home to fresher corpses, though even these lack portions that have been ravaged by tooth, beak, and claw, or by the subtler but more inevitable work of corruption and gravity. But worse than these are the ones whose corpses still breathe and speak and scream and writhe with the agony of slow, slow death, battered mercilessly by the sun and the wind and the cold of night, as their muscles and innards gradually stretch and tear, as they are suffocated by the weight of their own bodies. One of the women Missy passes by waves her hand, as much as she is able, with her wrist nailed and bound to the jagged beam behind her. Even at this small motion, she hisses with pain, but still she waves. Hesitantly, Missy approaches, feeling that this cannot be real, that this is all some nightmare from which she must soon wake, and yet she has felt that for months and months now, and never woken. The woman on the cross is rail thin, and looks as though she must have been sick or starving, or perhaps both, long before she found herself here. Her hair is shorn so close to the scalp that its color is unguessable, but her eyes are hazel and would be lovely were it not for the fever behind them. That awful gaze bores hotly into Missy's face. The woman asks her in a raspy whisper if she believes. She has to repeat the question before Missy, stunned and horrified by the ghastly surrealness of the past mile and of this fresh, nightmarish encounter, can muster an answer. Yes, Missy murmurs faintly. She believes. And it is true, or at least it was before. As far as she can say, it still is. She has had so little time or reason to really consider such questions, since her capture and torment, since her escape and long, desperate flight from the city of tents and monsters wearing the faces of men. Good, the woman nods slightly, too weak and damaged to move her head any more, even were she freed from her constraints. She smiles, or perhaps she grimaces. Her face is so fleshless, so twisted by deprivation and pain, that it's difficult to tell. Good, she says again, more softly, and then adds that Missy must find Burton. Missy echoes the name, questioningly, thinking her voice sounds even smaller and feebler than the dying woman's. She hates it, and this is a familiar sensation, all too familiar. She has suffocated in that sense of helplessness, of hopelessness, these last few months of death and terror and atrocity. Burton Pritchard, the crucified woman's eyelids flutter, and Missy thinks that she looks for all the world like she is battling a sudden wave of drowsiness, though of course she knows it is nothing so innocuous, so wholesome. The woman breathes that he will show Missy the way, and then her head slumps forward to rest slackly upon her emaciated chest. Missy cannot tell if the woman is still breathing or not, and doesn't dare to check more closely. She doesn't want to know. The woman is beyond her help, would likely not survive being removed from the cross, and perhaps would not permit it, Missy reflects, remembering the way her hazel eyes smoldered wildly. Stepping back from the cross and its now silent denizen, Missy continues on her way. About a half-mile later, from another shabby cross, a dark-haired man with a long, coarse beard raises his head to regard her with large, dark eyes. He says nothing, only stares at her, and she halts and stares back. A gust of wind cuts between them, raising a thin cloud of dust. A raven, one of many that Missy has seen among the crosses, arcs down through the air and alights upon the peak of the crucifix, just over the man's head. The man gives no sign that he is noticed. Tentatively, Missy asks, who has done all of this? No one, the man says flatly. Unlike the woman, he shows no outward sign of his torment, and Missy thinks that perhaps he has not languished so long upon his cross. We asked for this, he says after a pause, and Missy knows now that he is every bit as mad as the woman. No one, the raven mimics harshly. No one, no one. God wants this, the man continues, and we want this. He needs to see our love for him. He needs to see our contrition. Asked for this, the raven cries. Missy says nothing. The man settles back into his prior pose of stoic contemplation, and his gaze falls to the dusty earth, churned and tracked by the raising of his cross. The rains of prior weeks have drained away, leaving the sun-scorched, wind-scoured prairie, thirsting and dying once more. Missy moves on, turning her gaze earthward also. Behind her, watching her go, with dark, clever little eyes, the raven croaks, "No one wanted this." She walks only a little way further, before she can no longer bear the sight of the crucifixes, or even the dark, cool touch of their long shadows, and she turns from the road and begins to wander across a wide and trackless pasture. Her father taught her how to orient herself in both time and space by the sun and the stars, finding in her a more apt pupil than in her brother Barrett, and she knows that she is moving in a northwesterly direction. Why, and with what destination, is a question she cannot answer and tries not to dwell upon. She knows only that she is leaving Tabernacle City and its monstrosities behind her, as well as the house in Cheyenne that was once home, but never can be again, tainted beyond redemption by the final memory of that place. It is with some small surprise, then, that she crests the rise of a small hill and finds what looks like a tiny village nestled in the hollow below. For a moment, she thinks queasily of the city of tents and campers, and acidic panic begins to flood up her chest and into her throat. But this settlement is very unlike that one, too small and too orderly. And though it's only a vague impression, it seems somehow too pleasant, too kindly, to bear any resemblance to the home of the patriarchs. The center of the settlement is a large white farmhouse, ringed by trees, hardy spruces and pines and cottonwoods, and a single large Siberian elm. Around this sit an unhitched trailer house, 2 campers, and a large tent, but they are clean and well ordered, nothing like the squalid chaos she fled. For a while, Missy stands there, looking down into the bowl of the shallow valley, torn between the prospect of food and fellowship and the more certain safety of avoidance. Finally, she begins to descend the hill, her worn hiking boots crunching on the sugar sand and desiccated grass. Off in the west, the Bighorn Mountains are nothing more than a faint blue haze above the horizon, perhaps nothing more than a reflective mirage. Missy wonders if she's being reckless, foolish. She wonders if it even matters. Her parents are dead, her siblings lost and unlikely to be found again, perhaps dead as well. The memory of her time with the patriarchs is riddled with dark, blind patches, ones which she dares not explore, for fear that they will swallow her up completely. And so much of the landscape she has wandered through since her chance escape has been a waking nightmare, broken up by serenity and beauty that only enhances her sensations of unreality and isolation. Perhaps, she thinks bleakly, and not for the first time, There's little value in survival in this new and dreadful world. And then there are the birds, those emissaries of darkness and death, heralds of a strange and unknowable future. Those voices from unseen throats, inhuman and yet so nearly human. Their words seeming sometimes mindless mimicry, and sometimes like grim and otherworldly insights. They have called to her from the skies, from the roofs of buildings and the foliage of trees, from the sightless black of the night, and have sometimes haunted her half-remembered dreams. As though called forth by her thoughts, a blue jay cries sharply from the elm. Missy pauses, waiting for it to speak, but it only continues to give its harsh, gull-like call. And now that she is considering it, Missy cannot be certain she has ever heard anything other than a raven speak. She begins to move again, but before she's taken 3 more steps down the hillside, a woman is emerging from the white front door of the house, waving toward Missy, and then walking out to meet her. Her old-fashioned dress, pale blue, with a white floral pattern, looks recently laundered, making Missy feel suddenly aware of her worn and travel-stained jeans and jacket, of the layers of sweat and dust that have dried on her skin since she last had a chance to wash. The woman calls a warm and simple welcome, and shows both her hands as if to make plain that she carries no weapon, no hidden threat. Missy returns the greeting, her voice seeming threadbare even in her own ears, joyless and guarded, in contrast to the vibrant voice it answers. The woman draws near, introduces herself smilingly as Abigail. Speaking more softly now, she invites Missy inside the house, asks if she's thirsty or hungry or needs a bath. Reflexively, Missy begins to decline, even though this hospitality is the very prospect that drew her here. But she catches herself, reminds herself that she's alone, and that, as her father always told her, humans are not creatures made to survive alone. And she falteringly says that she'd be grateful for all 3. Abigail flashes her warm smile again, and says that she and her family are happy to share what they have, and that Missy is welcome to stay with them as long as she wishes, provided, of course, that she comes to them with a good heart. Missy assures her that she does, and then hesitates, weighing the wisdom of the next words that spring into her mind. She decides to contravene the instincts that the road behind her has instilled, to open herself to trust. She says that the only weapon she carries is a small buck knife, and that it's more a tool of utility, really. Abigail nods and says that's fine, that she understands completely, and from the tone of her voice, it seems clear that she does, and appreciates the gesture. As they step into the warm, tidy house, like a holdover from a dead world, as they walk to the long, polished oaken table, the air filled with smells of baking bread and roasting meat and boiling potatoes, and a dozen faces smile at her in gentle welcome. Missy thinks that she may never want to leave. After a meal and a hot bath, drawn from an old hand pump and heated on the stove, Missy dresses in fresh new clothes. Her hosts, Abigail specifically, she thinks, have provided. To her relief, it's not an old-fashioned dress, but thick warm socks, men's boxers, an undershirt, blue jeans, and a faded green sweater. Though clearly not new, it is all comfortable and functional, and feels luxurious after spending so long wearing soiled and worn clothing. When she looks in the mirror over the old basin sink, though, it all seems over-large on her, and she guesses that she has lost at least 20 pounds, far more than she could really afford. She thinks she can almost see the skull beneath her face. She emerges from the bathroom and finds Abigail and one of the men with whom she shared dinner waiting for her at the table in the large dining room. The others seem to have dispersed on unknown errands to other parts of the spacious old house or outside. Abigail asks her to sit with them and introduces the man as Burton. Missy's eyes flash surprise, and she half-consciously echoes the name. Yes, the man nods, smiling, and adds that he's pleased she has come to them. Missy hesitates to ask his last name, and before she can decide, Abigail begins to tell her that Burton is a great man, a healer and a teacher. But to this, Burton shakes his head and says that he's only a man, that anything great he has done has not been his will or his triumph. If there is any glory in his work, he says, it's only borrowed for the benefit of others and for the glory of God. Missy shifts in her seat, suddenly restless, itchy and hot in her own skin. The house that seemed so large now feels confining, smothering even, and it feels to her as though she is back in the cramped, filthy RV, awaiting the awful sound of the door opening, that she's hearing a man speak of God while he unmasks the hideousness that hides beneath his piety. Then Abigail is speaking to her gently, and she's back in the large, comfortable house, with its wholesome smells of country cooking. Abigail is telling her that everything is okay, that she's safe, and that no one here will harm her. And as she speaks, tears gather in the corner of her eyes. And before she knows it, Missy has fallen into the older woman's arms, and Abigail holds her as she weeps. Her tears, hard and hot and bitter, pour out of her like the poison blood of a putrid wound. And behind Abigail, Burton stands, his smile gentle and sad and wise, like the beatific smile of the ceramic Christ in the church Missy once attended every Sunday with her mother. For the next 3 days, all is well. She partakes in their meals and of their daily chores, caring for the chickens and hogs, and a couple of milk cows, washing and cleaning and cooking. Divided between so many hands, the workload is not so heavy, and she's grateful for the company and the food. Abigail asks her out on long walks in the evenings, after supper, and after she is assured multiple times that they will be perfectly safe near the farmstead. Missy happily joins her. The older woman reminds her, in some small way, of both her mother and her grandmother, a bit old-fashioned, but lovely and generous. And as much as she enjoys her newfound company, Missy sometimes longs for the outdoors, longs to be away from the murmur of many voices. The countryside, too, is beautiful in the evenings, golden prairie stretching beneath the dusk of fire, of pastel violets and pinks and pale cyan, while mountains loom purple and faint in the distance. Missy likes to watch the stars appear, one by one, in the velvety deep blue that stretches slowly from the eastward horizon, inevitably overtaking the whole of the heavens before they return home, after an hour or more of walking and speaking, sometimes excitedly, sometimes low and thoughtful. She likes, too, to see and hear the returning wildlife, pronghorns and elk, fire grouse and swift foxes, coyotes and wolves. And away from the others, Abigail speaks a little more freely. She talks of her life before, even of her childhood in Wisconsin. She tells softly of how her father, too, had been a deeply religious man, but not at all like Burton. He often locked her in her bedroom, and when she became old enough for boys to take an interest in her, he became still more strict, and interrogated her ever more probingly. It took her almost a year of this treatment to realize that he was jealous, to understand what it was that he wished from her. She managed to run away then, escaping when he let her out to return to school, and slowly making her way westward by any means she could. That was a very dark time, Abigail says, and she did many things, and many things were done to her, which made her ashamed and left her feeling broken. She lived a transient life, frequently dulling her mind with whatever substance, legal or otherwise, she could lay hands on, because consciousness, memory, and understanding were too terrible a burden sober. But then, she says, she met Burton. He was a great man even then, before the plague, before the sun set on the world humanity built for itself. Before she met him, she'd ceased to believe in anything at all, thought the universe was simply a vast machine of nothingness, and that awareness, sapience, only brought misery. She'd long ceased to believe in God, and thought mostly of her father and his awful secret longing when she heard the name. Burton showed her what men could be if they chose to be, which indeed they rarely do. Loving protectors and nurturers and teachers, selfless guides in both the physical and spiritual realms. Missy is silent for a long time after this telling, as they wander through the dwindling twilight on unmarked earthen roads. Then, finally, she begins to speak in barely more than a whisper of the deaths of her parents, of the way the patriarchs seized and violated and destroyed what they could not seize or violate. Her own story is sparse and broken, many of the words actually painful to pull from herself. But if there are any gaps, Abigail seems able to fill them in herself. She takes Missy's hand and squeezes it, and Missy holds on to it like a lost child reunited with her mother. After a while, Abigail says that she never felt truly reborn until the world came crashing down. It was too loud before, she says. There was too much to distance people from themselves, from the wonder of all creation. God's voice was too hard for most to hear, drowned out by politics and economics and technology, by the labyrinthine evils that humanity inflicts upon itself. Burton made it all easier, she adds with a soft, slightly mysterious smile. Burton gave them everything they needed to thrive. Somewhere off in the hills, a coyote begins to yip, and after a few moments, another answers its cry. After they have returned to the house and said their good nights, Missy falls into her bed with a kind of contentment she can hardly remember having felt before. Maybe she did once, before everything fell to pieces, but she'd not appreciated it then. How could she? She had not known the world as she knows it now, had not met such bitter suffering yet, let alone been rescued from it. She begins to drift into slumber, thinking that she has found a new home, a new family. Of course, they could never replace the original, but they were so much better than the loneliness and vulnerability she had known on the road and in the wilderness. This thought is soured, though, by a question that has needled the back of her mind since she first arrived at the farmstead. If this Burton is the same one the crucified woman knew. He is a preacher, surely, from the way he speaks of God, and from the way he leads grace before every meal. But he's so kindly and unassuming. Missy cannot believe there is any connection between him and that sprawling horror along the roadside. But the way that Abigail speaks of him, she cannot help but think, is so like the way the dying woman on the cross did. "3 days turn into a week, and a week into a month. After several long and insight-filled talks with Burton, Missy begins to use her true name again, Melissa. Missy, Burton has helped her to realize, was a belittling nickname, and one that took away her power. Between him and Abigail, Melissa realizes so much about herself and about the world that she had always been blind to before. She realizes that the world before the plague, the one which she had thought of as comfortable and safe, was in fact a great machine that ground up people and animals, communities and ecosystems, dreams and souls, only to feed itself and keep itself running, purposeless beyond its own lifeless sustenance. And so many had been slavishly devoted to that machine, had been willing but unaware cogs and gears and bolts, exhausting themselves and even killing and dying to preserve it. It was the devil, Burton tells her, the god of this world. And she believes him. She believes, she realizes. She never lost her faith in divinity, only her belief in humanity's worthiness. And now she understands that humanity isn't worthy, never has been, never could be. God gifted them his creation, and they tore it to pieces, shat all over it. But God is infinitely good, Burton tells her, and offers even the most unworthy another chance. All that is required is genuine penance and acceptance of a love that can never be earned. Melissa thinks of her parents, certainly dead, and of her siblings, lost and likely also dead. She thinks of seeing them once more in a place she cannot even imagine, where death and evil can never again find them. And she thinks of the man called Father Allgood, and of the men like him, of how they never said sorry once for anything they did, how their hearts were filled with pride and cruelty and still uglier things. She thinks of how they could never show penance, not truly, because they could never believe themselves to have done wrong. And yet, what they took from her, and what they never possessed themselves, she has regained. Melissa is stronger, more at peace than she has ever been before, and no one can ever harm her again, not while Burton and his loving God are with her. She smiles at Burton, and he smiles back, so gently. A month turns into 2. More arrive, some stay, many move on. Somehow, none of them ever seem to even consider threatening Burton or his flock. Some small part of Melissa wonders whether the crucifixes serve more than one purpose, but she pushes that thought away. The others tell Melissa that she looks like a healthy, strong young woman now, not the starving, terrified girl that came to them. And she smiles at them because she knows it's true. She has fed both her body and her spirit here among the faithful and the righteous, and she has grown strong in God's light. She joins Abigail and Burton, and the others that have been here long, in prayer each night before bed, and sometimes she finds herself weeping during the prayer, not with sorrow or pain, but with the purest and most overwhelming of joy. The world is ending, Burton tells them each night. The machine is breaking. The devil's power, which always rested in humankind, and in their hands so ready to do evil, is finally coming to an end. But, he says, there's still work to be done by the faithful. God's love has been rejected, has been spurned, and only a great show of penance can redeem the sorrowful tatters of humanity in his eyes. Each night, he asks if they are willing to show such penance. Yes, they all answer, firmly and unhesitatingly. Yes, Melissa smiles and weeps. The day comes when Burton tells them all that it is time, that they must begin their penitence now. He will join them, he says, and show them all the way. He has shown so many, he says, but now his time too is coming. God is ready for them all, and needs them only to prove their devotion, the depth of their remorse, for they have all sinned against him in some way or another. They were all part of the devil's great machine, or at least did nothing to stop it. Somewhere in the back of Melissa's mind, a small voice says that this is not the way. That Burton, even if he's kinder, is as mad as Father Allgood ever was. But Melissa drowns the voice out with her own as she cries amen to Burton's words. They move out behind the barn, where some of the men in the group have been stockpiling whatever building materials they could gather, and they each begin to construct their own crucifix. Even Burton and Abigail do so. As they work, Melissa dares to look up at Burton and ask him what will become of the others, of those who have not joined them yet. Burton smiles and says that she has a good heart to think of others, and that the Lord will surely see it. But then he grows a little graver, a little sadder, and says that he's done all he can, and that they must leave the rest in God's hands now. It takes a full day to construct all of their crucifixes satisfactorily, and as evening falls, they return to the house to share one final meal of fellowship. It is simple fare, since everyone has been busy all day outside. Only a thin vegetable soup and plain wheat bread, and there is a gentle sadness and bittersweet love between them all as they eat, talking little and feeling much. They go to bed afterward. Melissa doesn't sleep, and she can hear soft moans in the room beside hers. A younger couple that showed up only a few weeks before her sleep there. Whether they are weeping or making love, she cannot tell, but she hopes it's the latter. She hopes that someone will have a good final night. Lying awake, she hears the house fall silent, and the doubtful voice in the back of her mind says, "Don't do this. Don't do this." There's always hope. There's always another way. Outside the window of her little room, she thinks she hears a raven croaking. No one wants this. Morning comes, and with it toil and weeping. They all wear the same clothes, simple robes that the women have made from old bed sheets and other cloth scraps. Melissa even helped with this, despite her lack of skill in that arena. They take no breakfast other than water mixed with vinegar, and then they all kneel and pray. Melissa realizes that for all her time in the little non-denominational church that only she and her mother attended, the rest of her family feeling no such inclination, she knows very little about the prelude to the crucifixion, the Passion, she thinks it's called. She doesn't know how Jesus spent his last morning, only that some accounts said he carried his own cross, and others said another man did. But Burton makes it clear which view he takes, and that they will follow in the Savior's footsteps. They gather up what they've built, and slowly, painfully, begin to drag it up the hill, toward the road that Melissa abandoned over 2 months ago now. How much has changed, she thinks, her back groaning and sweat beading on her forehead beneath her burden, and in how little time. The little voice of doubt says nothing has changed, not really, only her willingness to forsake all reason for false promises of safety and peace. You are the devil, she says inwardly to the little voice. You are tempting me away from the true path, the path that Burton has shown me. I am you, the voice replies. All that awaits on that hill is agony and death and tragedy. This is not Golgotha, and Burton is no Jesus. He saved me, Melissa insists. He's killing you, and himself, and all the others, the voice replies. She waits for it to speak again, but it's silent now, leaving her to ruminate on that final thought. He is killing us, she repeats, unwillingly. She doesn't know that she's spoken aloud until the woman beside her, one of the next room neighbors she heard in the night, looks over at her sharply. The woman's eyes are red and bloodshot, but Melissa doesn't think they were while they drank diluted vinegar and prayed. The strain of the shabby crucifix on her back is too much for her smallish body, perhaps. The woman whispers so faintly that Melissa can scarcely hear her, that she doesn't want this. Melissa hesitates, then says that Burton told them all no one would be forced, no one need feel obliged, and that if they doubted, they were free to leave in friendship. Yes, the woman says, but then what if he is right after all? Melissa has no answer. The sun has risen high. Melissa judges it to be past 10:30 when they top the crest and reach the roadside, where previously raised crucifixes still stand. All their denizens are silent now, falling apart, gnawed and pecked at. Burton, his robe soaked through with sweat and his chest heaving, tells them all to take a brief rest, and then the true labor will begin. After he has regained some of his breath, he begins to speak, tells them that they will all need to help one another, Even if it is very hard, he emphasizes, even if it is painful. He tells them that sometimes love, true love, can feel incredibly cruel, and that the test was holding to it, even then. Then he bids one of the other men to fetch the hammer and nails, the rope and the ladder, and they do so from some hidden place near the road. Melissa wonders how it was placed there, if someone came in the night, or in the hours before dawn, to prepare the place for them, and who it might have been. Burton continues speaking, telling them that they will raise the crosses and take their places upon them, one at a time. Each crucifixion will be a communal process, a group effort. They will show the Lord how much they love him and each other by mimicking his sacrifice together. Now the little voice speaks again, for the last time, asking Melissa who will be left to help the last one into place, and if that won't be Burton. Melissa feels nauseous, her heart racing in her rib cage, her legs itching to run. The young woman with the reddened eyes says, quaveringly, that she will go first, and Melissa is certain that she's volunteering, because she knows she will break and flee if she's not the first. And she feels in this moment such kinship, such compassion for the woman, and wonders if they might have been friends in the former world, before the plague and the birds, and the certainty of doom. The woman's husband, or perhaps boyfriend, since they wear no rings, helps her to raise her cross. The holes for the crucifixes have already been dug, looking fresh still, and once more Melissa wonders who prepared them and when. The young man weeps as he helps his partner into place, as he takes the small ladder and binds her limbs with rope, then drives the long nails through her flesh. She screams and he weeps, and those below pray and sing and shout their loving encouragement. Burton tells her that she will be with God soon, that they will all be with him soon. Yes, the woman cries through her screams. Yes, with him soon. And then she begins to babble, to tell God how she loves him, to beg him to spare her lover that drives nails through her heels, to forgive her dead parents and bring them back to her. Below they sing and pray and shout their love. Her lover is next, taking the place beside her. He too screams and pleads and babbles. Below they sing and pray and shout. Then Abigail takes her turn, and as she clambers awkwardly onto her cross, Melissa thinks, No, not Abigail. She wants to tell the older woman to wait until last, but she knows she will not, knows Abigail would not listen if she did, would only shake her head sadly at Melissa's lack of faith. She asks Melissa to drive in her nails. And suddenly Melissa feels cold all the way through. Two ravens, perched on a cross, bearing only two skeletal hands behind her, begin to croak loudly. No more. No more. No one. wants this. No one asked for this. No more. Please, Abigail smiles down at her. Shivering, unable to speak, Melissa takes the nails and the hammer and ascends the ladder the men have placed. As she drives in the first nail, Abigail shrieks, her gentle, beautiful, grandmotherly voice breaking and scattering like dropped glass. Melissa's inner voice doesn't speak, but it screams. It screams and screams and screams as she swings the hammer and the nail bites deeper, turning red. As Melissa repeats over and over to herself that love can feel cruel, and that they will all be with God soon, and that the patriarchs can never take her again now. As the ravens croak that no one wants this, and then take wing and fly sunward, as the people below sing and pray. Story, narration, and music by Lars Mollevand. If you enjoyed today's story, please rate, review, and share. Thank you for listening. We'll meet again in darker pastures.